The Hanged King is a major antagonist of the SCP Foundation universe. He is a powerful being in the SCP settings, being the monarch of the distant realm of Alagadda, and is considered one of the most enigmatic and powerful entities in the multiverse. Although it is often shown that the king is in actuality being used by his purported servant, the ambassador of Alagadda. He is designated by the Foundation as SCP-2264-5. The Hanged King plays an important role in the only game in town canon. Biography. Due to the universe of the SCP Foundation having no official canon, there is also no official origin or biography to the Hanged King. The biography below is composed of several different sources of the SCP Wiki, which can work together, but necessarily do not. Possible origins. And so the crows laugh / about the serpent. The Hanged King was once the ruler of the city-state of Alagadda, where he governed as a corrupt tyrant, suppressing and exploiting monarchs. He indulged himself in base pleasures and possibly practiced ancient, dark magic from the abyss. At some point the king came into contact with the brothers Death, or Yaldabaoth depending on canon, and played a game with them, but lost, which caused the brothers to get the souls of all Alagaddans. As a result, most of the people of Alagadda rebelled against their king, setting his palace on fire and killing all who were loyal to him, including his court jester. The king was captured, and his crown and robes were ripped away from him, replaced with rags and chains. His jaw was then broken and he was forced to crawl through the streets of the city, while being mocked, kicked and pelted with filthy things by his former subjects, who all cheered loudly. In response he only mumbled unholy words, which frightened the people, who in turn cheered louder in order to silence him. The king was hung outside the city on a hill, and while suffocating to death, he continued to mutter unholy words until he died. He was originally left to hang, to be feasted on by crows and maggots, but as nothing touched the dead body, the people buried him in a shallow grave. After this, the people started to rob the palace of their former ruler, indulging themselves in his riches. The next day, the brothers' death in forms of crows started to gather around the grave of the dead king, and strange noises could be heard from beneath the earth, though this was only heard by a homeless man, who was dismissed by the rest of the people. The day after that, the river that flew through the city turned red and started to smell like human blood, and many citizens fell ill, started to bleed and tremble and were bound by chains. Those who stole from the palace suffered the most, growing weak and eventually dying. On the third day the illness lifted, but the people became suicidal, cutting their faces and slitting their throats, and their blood poured through the city into the Red River. Madness spread and most animals save for the crows also fled the city in this time. On that very same day, having refused to die and having bargained with the souls of others with the brothers' death, the king rose from his grave and traveled through the city, back to his palace. There he sat down on a throne covered with rusted spikes, which pierced his flesh and brought agony to his soul. Despite the pain, he remained silent for a moment, until the palace began to tremble and the Red River boiled. The crows started to circle the city and pecked any surviving subjects to death. The Hanged King himself was now bound to the seat permanently, and his undead court jester approached him, offering a silver chalice of blood from the brothers, which the king took, but due to his trembling hands, he dropped it on the floor, spilling the blood which would have completed his resurrection. This led to the dead throughout the city to rise again, now in twisted, inhumane form, whose faces were covered in masquerade masks. The dead started a continuous carnival through the street, acting like the previous days had just been a play, and depraved acts such as orgies became commonplace on the streets. The Hanged King himself started to scream at this, but his death had made him unable to make any sounds, which led him to weep in silence. The brothers laughed and in their crow forms, flew away, though they would always watch over the city. During the uprising, the scholars and artists had decided to run and left the city before the hanging. Despite their escape, they suffered from nightmares, which showed the new vile form of the city. These dreams would influence them to create works of art, plays or literature based on the Hanged King and the city around him, which would spread his influence and make everyone who views said adaptations accessible to the king. Only game in town. The Hanged King was one of the many aspects of the being labeled as Rudy, the embodiment of the human fear of the unknown which predates humanity. Rudy being the manifestation of this fear, it couldn't directly interact with the real physical world, and as the written word began spreading, its influence diminished since the words could permanently affix the world to certain choices. As a result, Rudy inserted itself into various stories and appearing as various monsters such as Grendel, St. George's Dragon and the Hanged King. However, if Rudy stayed in one story for long enough, it would eventually take control of the story and change it to its liking. The Wanderer's Library, a group associated with the Serpent's Hand, claimed the Hanged King to be an ancient, unknowable thing with more names than the stars. The king once stayed at the library since it embodied the words which weakened Rudy, and during his stay the library became more and more insular and depressive, which led to a sudden loss of knowledge in the 11th century. This dark knowledge ended up in the black vaults of Alagadda. The vaults served as a dark reflection of the library, which held long-forgotten dark knowledge sought by multiple individuals such as the Knight of Flowers and a member of Are We Cool Yet? The Scarlet King. There are two accounts that detail the relationship between the Hanged King and the Scarlet King. Dust and blood. At some point the Hanged King came into contact with the Scarlet King, an even more powerful god, to whom he fell into service, alongside Jesser and Moloch. He came to be known as the King on the Gallows, he who was hung, who tore down the tree of knowledge. The Devites, who primarily worshipped the Scarlet King and his servants, also began worshipping the Hanged King. Tears and Bone. The Queen Mab of the Fairies, who had a good relationship with the Hanged King, had gifted the king 5 slaves, Bauta, Arlecchino, Pantalone, Brigella, and Cockrock. The Hanged King showed affection to the first 4, but for Cockrock he only showed contempt and brutally abused him for most of his life due to being ugly and poor being, even nicknaming him the Scarlet Fool due to Cockrock being red from anger covered in his own blood.